Welcome to episode 1 of my new woodworking series. Now, if you haven't, go ahead and check out my last video. It's technically my first video, but it's a shop tour, and you'll kind of see where I'm starting with. But to give you a quick synopsis, I moved into this house a little over a year ago, closer to almost 2 years now that I think about it. And I basically piled all of my shop equipment into the garage, and I never actually got around to hooking it up. So in this last video, I did a tour and just kind of showed you the current state of everything in its rough location. Following that, I had a little pet project I wanted to do. I'm wanting to build a table, and so I need to mill down some lumber, and I need to um, basically plane down some slabs, and I just can't fit it on the joiner planer. It's going to be wide. So I started building a router sled, and I got halfway through recording that video, and I was just very disappointed in the overall quality of filming and in the quality of work. I mean, the shop was still a mess. I'd only cleaned up a little bit, and it was challenging for me to walk around. It was challenging me to get good shots with a tripod, the big one and the tinier tripod. So I started to think about a camera mount build, and I'd been toying around with an idea in my head for a couple years now. So I went to go ahead and do that, and one of my other problems popped up, and this happens in woodworking or in just shop life in general, is you go to solve one problem and there's a domino effect. The domino effect is this miter saw was kicking up so much dust that I was constantly vacuuming all of this. And if I had something on the table like a camera mount that I was working on, it was getting covered in dust. I'd go to the table saw and I'd be covered in dust. And I have a 6-week-old child. So occasionally, pretty often actually, I have to go in and relieve my wife while she uses the bathroom, while she makes a bottle, while she does her homework. She's in nursing school. So there's a lot that she has to do, and I have to pull my 50%, and covered in sawdust is not it's not something I can do. I can't pick up a baby while I'm covered in sawdust. And so yes, I do change my shirt each time, but if it's all over my arms, so dust collection quickly came to the top of my list. Now, I have a Harbor Freight Central Machinery dust collector, and it has served me well for many years. I bought it at around $150, probably in 2017, 2018. I used it in its standalone feature. I eventually moved it to its own woodworking shed with an air compressor. I hooked up a 55-gallon drum to it. But it's been good, but it's not been great. And there's a few things that I've been missing. The first is I want a pleated filter similar to this one. It's actually quite heavy. And I wanted a cyclone. Now, in my research, I really came across two problems. One, there are modifications that I could make to put one of these filters on my Harbor Freight dust collector. But the problem is they're like $200 or $300. And then the other problem is to modify that dust collector, a lot of people pull out the impeller and put an upgraded impeller, and then they also make a larger inlet and outlet on it. And that's a lot of work. I mean, total between the impeller, the filter, I'm looking at somewhere between $300 and $400. Now, Harbor Freight's Bauer lineup actually makes a new dust collector that has the pleated filter, the upgraded motor, all of that, and that's $449. So that's kind of the baseline. I figured if I'm going to do this, I really want to have that filter, so it'd be cheaper to go buy this Harbor Freight one. Now, one of the other things I disliked about the Harbor Freight dust collector is it was only actually 1.5 horsepower. And originally, I believe they advertised it as a 2 horsepower unit. But you can obviously tell based on the amperage and it being 110 that it's not, in fact, 2 horsepower. The other issue I wanted was a cyclone. Now, before I found this guy, I was struggling on what to do because all of the cyclones that I could find were like the mini Dust Deputy, the knockoff Temu version. They were like this tall. Or I'd have to drop a few $1,000s and get like a Clearview or the big Dust Deputy. Now here's the thing. I'm in a 20 by 20 shop. I don't need a $4,000 dust collector. I don't need a $2,000 dust collector. I don't need any of these giant dust collectors. Now, a lot of people on YouTube, you're probably seeing hundreds of videos of YouTubers with massive dust collectors. And I can tell you for a fact they are oversized, and even if they grew into them, they would never need that. I have been in production cabinet shops that use dust collectors only slightly larger than what Harbor Freight sells. They're not needed. They get those because they're sponsored, on the hopes that you guys will go out and spend that kind of money. So I didn't want that. In my searching, though, I found this beauty. This right here is the Grizzly Growler G0863, and it's $409.50. This unit is standalone, meaning it's on its own cart. You can go ahead, you can put on this top piece right here, you can go ahead and connect one of these, and you can connect that to your existing dust collector. And then right out here, you got 4-inch, or you could take this off and have 6-inch. So it's standalone. I loved it for the price, 400 bucks. Then it came time to decide on the dust collector. And after looking through everything, I decided to go with the Grizzly G0548ZP, as in zebra pizza. Okay. I went with that because it was $625, so it is a little bit more expensive than the Bauer. It came with a better filter. It is a true 2 horsepower. It runs on 220, and it's a very heavy-duty machine. I would say it's probably the best value machine I could find doing all of this searching. Now, after taxes, I'm $625 into the dust collector, $409.50 into this with shipping, and you do need to get freight for this. I was a little under $1,200. It's a fairly good price, but it's a little bit more than I wanted to pay. Now, quality. Dust collector's in immaculate shape. I have no qualms with that. This did have a little bit of damage. There is a dent on one of the sides of this bottom piece. It's very small, no big deal. This round piece at the top is dented, and the drum that it comes on is dented. Now, I reached out to Grizzly, I sent them photos, and I received this last week. I sent them the photos yesterday when I unpacked it, followed up this morning, and they're going to send out replacement parts for it. Great service. So one thing I'd like to mention before we get too far into this is there are other dust collector options you can use, and I want to tell you why I didn't use them. And they're basically the shop vacs and the dust extractors. Now, I know there's a lot of new dust extractor technology. Rockler and Harbor Freight both have great dust extractors based on the reviews I've seen. However, this wouldn't work for me as I didn't want to move them from tool to tool. And two, while they are great, they just do not have the same CFM as a larger unit would have. Okay. Now, while you might be thinking, but they're advertised as 2 horsepower and this is 2 horsepower. Horsepower is not the end all be all of dust collection. In fact, what you need to look at is the CFMs. Now, again, I'm not an air engineer or anything. I don't, I'm not qualified in this, but my very little understanding is CFMs are a volumetric measure, okay? So what that means is this is a 4-inch piece of pipe, okay? CFM is how much air can flow through here. So yes, as the air speeds up, it does pull more air through, but also as the pipe gets bigger, it pulls more air through. But there's also a limit on how much that motor can pull. So if I took my shop vac and I hooked it up to a 10-inch pipe, it's not going to be able to utilize the full 10 inches. So if you think of a pipe as a highway, right? If we're looking at just the pipe, not the actual motor, a 4-inch is like a two-car lane, 2 cars going in one direction. A 6-inch is like 4 cars going in one direction. And you have to size the motor to the pipe. Otherwise, it's useless. If I hook this up to my dust extractor, it would not be able to handle this 4-inch pipe, and I'd get really bad results. So that's why I didn't opt for those. Also, the other thing is I've just not had great luck. I love my shop vac. It's a rigid, it's nothing fancy. It does good work for what it is, but it is a shop vac. So let's talk about the different brands. Okay, as I mentioned, I looked into them. The Central Machinery right now is $299. The Bauer is $449. The Grizzly $409, and that Grizzly dust extractor $625, just for a price reference. The Clearview, Oneida, Dust Deputy, all that, the comparable unit to this starts at $2,000. So let's talk about piping, okay? And when we talk about piping, there's two things we need to discuss: material and size. So let's start with material. You have three main options. You have PVC, which looks similar to this, DWV, which is what this is, and that's drain pipe, and you have HVAC piping. And for all of you who are thinking about NordFab, NordFab technically is HVAC ducting. So PVC is ridiculously expensive. I looked into it, not happening. So then I looked at DWV, which is what I ran my last shop in, and I like it. It's thinner than PVC, so it can't handle the water pressure that PVC can, but that's not needed here. It's fairly cheap. A 10-foot long section at 6 inches is about $55. Then we go to HVAC. Now, HVAC comes in three thicknesses of the metal. So you have 30 gauge, 26 gauge, 24 gauge. The lower the gauge, the thicker the metal. In my research, 30 gauge is the standard you're going to find at Home Depot. And what it typically is, it comes in 5-foot sections, and it's a flat piece of metal, and you roll it together and it crimps together. Now, the 30 gauge is not advised for dust collection because apparently if all of your blast gates are closed and your machine is on, the pressure can actually cause it to bend. 30 gauge is out. When you look at the 26 gauge, it's a little bit more expensive for the piping than DWV, but the fittings are about half the price. Now, the caveat with it is because it's crimped together, you do have to tape it, you'll get air loss. So my two choices that I opted for was either DWV or I was going to use HVAC. And then I started thinking about what's the actual size of the pipe I want to use. Now, my last shop, I used 4-inch. And I'm going to tell you, in 99% of garage shops, 4-inch is all you need. I'm not going with 4-inch, just to be fully transparent. And the reason I'm not going with 4-inch is twofold. One, I'd like to run this in the attic, okay? So that creates one unique situation of, imagine that this reducer, this 6 to 4 isn't there. This is where the pipe is going to start in my garage, and it's going to come out and it's going to do a soft 90 into the attic, then another soft 90, and then it's going to split and go to the different areas. Once it comes down, because I have a garage door right here that occupies about 40% of the space, I can't have a dedicated drop right here for the table saw that comes straight down because it'll hit the garage door. And I need to open the garage door to be able to get plywood and lumber in here. So instead, it's going to have to come down over here, and I'm going to have a hose. Now, I'm a one-man shop, so I don't mind moving the hose occasionally, and I can step over it for the most part. But I'm going to have to use a lot of hose. And because when you use these flexible hoses, similar to this, but obviously much bigger, it creates turbulence and it lowers your CFM. Because I knew I was going to do that and I couldn't just hard pipe it, I want to go with the 6 and bring it to 6 all the way up until the blast gate, which is going to be a 4-inch blast gate, and then I'll convert it. And the reason I'm going in the attic, just as a caveat, is while most of us know wall space is at a premium, so is my ceiling space. So in my shop, I only have about a foot on each side of the garage door. So if I wanted to drop here for the miter saw, I'd have to go up around this wall, and there's a door there, so I'd have to go all the way up, and I'd have to go all the way to here, down, And doing that would be, one, a lot more pipe, a lot more bends, and then I'd lose all of this wall space here, which I want to put cabinets in. I'd lose all of this wall space, so I'm at a premium. I could run it across the ceiling, but I want my lights there. So if I ran it across the ceiling, I'd have to move all the lights to cater towards it, and then I'd have shadow, so I'd have to drop the lights down. And there's other things I want to hang from the ceiling at some point. So that would be a problem. So attic is the best shot. So with that in mind, I know I'm going with 6-inch. The price for HVAC duct is more than the cost of DWV. Now, one caveat I'd like to mention is I do have a friend who works with 6-inch DWV, and he can get me the fittings for free, because a lot of times if they're working and they spill primer on them and they don't end up using them, or whatever the case is, they end up with a pile of these. Some might have cracks or damage, and because I'm not doing anything with sewage, I can use those. I could put a piece of tape over it, whereas he can't. So I have that one leg up. So I am going to go with the DWV. It is going to be ran through the attic. What else is there? I'm going to be modifying this system. So the way that the system works is typically the Grizzly dust collector is just like the Harbor Freight. It's on a little base. It rolls around. This is on a rolling base. I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to mount the motor directly here, and I'm going to use this one HVAC duct. And as you can see, it doesn't quite fit over it right now. And that's because, again, I said this got bent in shipping and Grizzly sending me a new one. But this will go up here, slide over, and the motor will sit directly on top of that. Out from the motor, we're going to connect to this, which will have the filter on top, a bag on the bottom. Now, on a lot of dust collectors, like Harbor Freight and the cheaper Grizzly ones, this is not square, it's round. And coming off the unit, they have an adapter that turns it around, and you would use a hose. Well, on this Grizzly, they don't. They use this really nice looking metal. This is going to be a problem that I've identified because these inlet and outlets are rectangular shaped. They're 6-inch by 5-inch. And the way it works is the motor is normally mounted on the ground. And so this connects to the motor. And then basically it connects into here. And so the way it would normally sit is this would sit normal, and then this would connect like so. Well, it'd actually be closer to this orientation. And so the problem is, because it's rectangular and I'm mounting the motor flipped 90 degrees, the way that this would connect in would actually have it sitting like this, which is not optimal. The filter would just clog up. So, after a lot of research, what I'm opting to do is I'm going to mount the motor on the wall, and I've been able to locate the replacement parts for the cheaper Grizzly machine that fits this, and I'm going to convert it into pipe. I'm going to convert it into round hose, and I'm going to convert this into round hose, and I'm going to use a 4-inch hose. I don't predict this will be a problem, simply because this is just for the filter part. This is going to catch most of the chips. It's not going to reduce my capacity at all, and it's the only way to make it work without a lot of modification. So the tentative plan is to have all this neatly stacked. For this bottom, I'm not going to screw it directly onto this drum. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of these, and I'm going to make a plywood donut that sits on the bottom of this and converts it to this. And I'm going to use 6-inch hose to connect it to that drum. And the reason for it is if I'm in the middle of a project, I'm going to undo the thumb screw. I'm going to slide the hose up, roll that out of the way, and roll a second one in its place, and then screw it on. What else do we have? Let's talk about some of the fittings and some problems. So one of the things I like is it comes with a lot of 6-inch to 4-inch fittings. Now, I'm not going to use these where they would normally go because I'm going to run it in 6-inch. But when I drop it down, for instance, over here, I'm going to use this really nice fitting, and I'll put my blast gates on this. So I am going to save these. The problem with these fittings, as an example is no fitting is the right size. I've bought blast gates from Woodcraft, blast gates from Rockler. I've bought parts from Amazon, Harbor Freight. None of them match. This is a 4-inch fitting. This is a 4-inch piece of pipe. To give you an example, the pipe fits over it and it's loose. This fits over it and it's loose. There's really no consistency. So in order to prevent any issues and air gaps and leakage, in the past I've used duct tape, I've used foil tape, and just let the looseness, like I'd put it on here and then I would put tape around it. I don't want to do that this time. So in this case, I'm going to be using some sponge window seal to go around it, put the tightest piece of pipe I can on there, and then I'll wrap foil around it. So that's going to be one thing I do. General layout. Dust collector is going to go in that corner underneath the hot water or the water heater. Pipes are going to come up. I'm going to have a Y pipe that takes it over here, and I'm going to have a drop for the router and the jointer. Coming off the Y over here, I'm going to have a Y that drops it down right here. I'm going to use Rockler's dust right system that I have, and this is going to be where I can do sanding. Coming off of that, there's going to be a second Y that's going to go right here to the miter saw. The miter saw is going to have a 6-inch drop down for the dust shroud that's going to go around this, and then a 4-inch hose that's going to convert to the actual built-in. Coming off that, there's going to be another drop here. I'm going to have to move these bins over, I believe, or redo something with them. And the drop is going to be here. It's likely going to be this. I'm going to have overhead dust collection for the saw stop. This is going to be routed to the bottom of the saw stop on a hose with a magnet, and this is going to go to the bandsaw. The hose with the magnet on the saw stop is going to be able to be moved to the Grizzly bandsaw because the bandsaw does have 2 ports. It can also be used on the drum sander. That's a general layout. One other piece I'd like to touch on is NordFab. Okay, I know a lot of people are going to make comments, or maybe not, maybe I won't get any comments on this video, but inevitably I always see people talking about NordFab. And I've had NordFab fittings before. At a prior shop I had, we ran it, everything in NordFab. It was great. I sold it all, and I lost a lot of money doing that. And basically I didn't need it because I was moving to an apartment, and it was already expensive enough to store all this. NordFab is really, really expensive, and the only way I would ever justify it is in a large shop that's production, okay? Some of those NordFab fittings cost a few $100s a piece. It's not practical for most people, and in a shop this size, it's not practical. If I was running a massive operation, sure, I would consider NordFab. But I think in most of the shops that we all use, there's really no use for it. It looks great, but it's not worth the price. Some of these dust collector systems alone cost $4 or $5 grand. The NordFab that people put in their shops cost $5 to $10 grand in some cases. Now, if you have a smaller shop like this, it's going to be significantly cheaper, but it's still going to be very expensive. I'm not going to do that. We don't have that level of production in here. What else do we have? Let's talk about some of the videos and how this is going to work. One caveat is I'm not a videographer. I'm not a director. I actually haven't touched any video editing software since 2010 when I was in TV productions. So bear with me on the quality of these videos. I'm definitely trying to increase them. To give you a tentative schedule on how this is going to work, this video is going to explain the dust collection system. Episode 2 is going to be installing this, doing the small modifications, running the pipe. Ideally, episode 3 is finishing the camera mount. Episode 4 is going to be the router sled. Episode 5 is going to be some shop upgrades. I'd like to insulate this garage door. I'd like to run an air compressor in the attic, and I'd like to insulate the attic. One Once we get to that stage, we'll talk about what the next videos are, but this is just a tentative guide. Please like and subscribe to these videos. I really want to help everybody out, and I want to do it in a way that is reasonable. And I don't want to dog on any YouTube creators, because I've met a lot of them at Workbench Con and other events, and a lot of them are great guys. I've reached out to a few of them for project help before, and they responded very quickly. They're good people, and I know that they take a lot of sponsors on because it's their job and that's who pays their bills. I don't have those sponsors. I don't think I ever will. I want to build my shop around the everyday person. Now, do I have some expensive tools? Sure. I got a saw stop, I got a joiner, I got a domino. But I took years to buy those. Everything in this shop took a decade to buy. And I'm still a long way off. My drill press needs to be upgraded. My planer needs helical heads. I need some router bits. I got a lot of stuff like that I need. And I want to gear these videos towards being average for you guys. I don't ever want to get into a position where somebody offers me a $5,000 dust collector, and then next thing you know, I'm getting $5,000 in NordFab too. Because for most of us, that's not reasonable. Now, I do make a decent amount of money at my job. So I am a little bit more blessed than most people. But I want these videos to be geared towards what the average everyday person can buy. I don't want to go out and go crazy, spend a lot of money that most people don't have, and I definitely don't want things just gifted to me. Now, that being said, if I ever do get a sponsor, one of the promises I plan to make to you guys is I'll be 100% honest. I'll be critical. I'm not beholden to anybody. But I doubt I'll get sponsors. It sounds like a hassle that I don't want to deal with because I'm kind of lazy. But I digress. Enough of that tangent. Please give me feedback. I don't care if you go into the comments and say, Michael, your video absolutely sucked. You talk too much. You didn't explain things. Your lexicon is terrible. You have a horrible voice. I don't care. Give me feedback. Tell me what I did good. Tell me what I did bad. These videos are for you. I love this hobby, and I want to share it with you guys, and I want to show you how a real person sets their stuff up. But I definitely appreciate you all watching this, and take care.